Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the University Philosophical Society. I'm honoured to be here to have the chance to explain to you why President Obama is really the only option choice in this election. I'm going to start by briefly outlining the topics which are set to reappear throughout this debate. Namely, they are social issues, the economy, and foreign policy. And I'm going to make it obvious why President Obama is the only sane and sensible option. While I look briefly on Romney's record and plans for the future, the facts are going to do most of the talking. After all, you know, he's the nominee that the Republicans didn't even want themselves. So on to social policies and issues. I believe that religion has every right to exist within a society. But I don't believe that this religion has the right to infringe upon rights of others. So I agree with Obama when he says that he believes that women have the right to choose whether or not to have an abortion. It's clear and simple. Obama has been long supportive of reproductive rights, whereas Romney, he's more, he's to and fro. When he was governor of Massachusetts, he was pro-choice, but now he's done like a complete flip around, and he's adamantly against abortion. Some people sort of ask why, and the reason mostly why is that the Tea Party has a growing influence within the Republican Party. It's pretty obvious from his running mate Paul Ryan, whose original stance on abortion was no exceptions at all. Another issue that Obama has dealt with pretty handily is gay rights. He's the first president ever to come out in support of gay marriage. He also repealed the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, which was a huge momentous occasion, as it allowed thousands of servicemen and women to vocalise their true identity while serving the nation. Romney is outrightly against gay marriage, but in 1994 he stated that he was himself one of the strongest supporters of gay marriage in the country. I don't know when he changed around, but it seems like he does it a lot. On to the economy now. As I'm not an economist, I'm not going to explore the inner and depths of plans and tactics put forward by each party. What I'm going to do is outline one simple question. Are Americans better off now than they were 4 years ago? Certainly there's a group of people within American society who are not, the unemployed. But on the whole, as the average American, are they better off? The facts seem to point as if they're almost on a similar basis. So despite a crippling global recession, life has not become much harder, or at least has recovered again for Americans. In 2008, the US GDP went into freefall thanks to the global recession. Thankfully, it has stopped eventually, and it has begun to rise again, and is almost back at pre-2008 levels. My source of this isn't some liberal biased media, but the US Department of Commerce. This also can't be attributed, like some people saying, to the increase in immigration, as real GDP is back to the same rate as in 2006. In the area of unemployment, the Obama administration has admitted there has been serious falls. The figures are not where they should be. However, they are increasing in the right direction. In fact, over 133 million people are now employed in the US. This is compared to 134 million people who were employed in 2008 prior to the impact of the recession. I'd like to move on to my final point. Foreign policy. Well, in foreign policy, both parties don't seem to disagree on much. The only thing they seem to disagree on is the level to which they're willing to use military force in certain situations. One of these situations at the moment is a situation in Iran. Mitt Romney he doesn't believe that the economic sanctions which Obama has placed on Iran are working. He insists that military action is the only way forward. Fortunately, the facts beg to differ. The Iranian rial has dropped dramatically in its value over the last month, and unrest is occurring throughout the country. So in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, this is a two-horse race. Faced with the options of President Obama or a flip-flopping, formerly liberal Republican led by a crazy Tea Party, is there really a choice at all? Unfortunately, yes, as it's a democracy. Thus, I have the privilege of being the first person to implore you, please, ladies and gentlemen of the field, vote to re-elect President Obama.
now welcome our first speaker from Team Romney, Senior Software Economics Student, David O'Shaughnessy.
Ladies and gentlemen of the University Philosophical Society, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to be able to have the opportunity to talk to you tonight about why America should elect Mitt Romney as the next President of the United States. I want to talk about the economy because it seems to be the problem that the first speaker has skirted over and talked about social issues, which is obviously what the most powerful man in the world with such influence should be focusing on. But first of all, I'm going to deal with some of the facts that he's talked about. He said that Americans are better off, almost on the whole, over 4 years, when in fact Americans are worse off by at least $4,000 per million household than 1995. So what is Obama's policies going to do about this? Well, since Obama has taken over, the US has been in the midst of the worst recession since the Great Depression. That's fine. For 43 straight months, American unemployment has been over 8%, and the labour force has been strengthened to a record low, and labour force participation fell to 63.5. What is Obama's solution to this? He doesn't have it. Obama has been inheriting problems for 4 years. He's been telling us he's been inheriting these problems, but he hasn't offered many solutions to do it. And then we talk about a guy, we talk about a guy here who brings up a man who says a crazy Tea Party. So let's talk about Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney started Bain Capital in 1984 and has since turned it into a massive success for investors. With businesses such as Staples, Skype and Domino's Pizza, he has turned billions in tax, employment and general wealth to the American public. You might say that he produces profit and pays tax. All Obama does is take tax and produce debt.
On that point,
yes, sir.
We don't actually know how much tax he pays since we don't have that much access to his
And I was waiting on it to happen. And that doesn't matter. I don't think his personal finances are any issue with this, and that's not what I'm talking about.
Shame.
Oh, you are all going to give me up. Okay. He has paid taxes. We know he pays taxes, and we know he generates wealth in the American economy. We know all Obama does is increase tax and produce debt. No, Lydia, thanks, you're okay for the minute. I want to get a point across before the next one. What has Obama done? Essentially, he's done Obamacare. He says this is going to save American families on average $2,500 on their policies. We know this isn't true. And we know it's a fundamentally un-American policy. We know it goes against the human rights and the free enterprise of an American society. No, I already told you all
Are you against poor people dying? Or you saying
No, see, I knew you were going to bring up a really socialist point, and I got to put that into place. If you want to have universal rights like that, you can live in a socialist country like Ireland. On the other hand, we're trying to protect the people. Shame. One more person says shame, but let me get a point across here. The point is that it's un-American. And Americans will vote with their wallets. And I will tell you that in 4 days' time, sound economics will overcome socialism, poorly presented facts, and they'll do it in their number. So let's... Lydia, yeah, okay.
Okay, so Romney's regressive tax system is going to get the rich richer, we get that. How is that going to get, the masses of people out of the recession and benefit from the economy?
Well, you bring up an interesting point there. It's going to make the rich richer. Well, if he repeals Obamacare, surely he's going to make the middle class slightly better off, because they won't be encouraged or won't be coerced into paying into a health service scheme that they don't want in their number. It's just been pushed on. The majority of people have already had private health insurance, and it's pushed the policies up. They don't want it, they don't need it, and the voting will prove that they don't want it, and it's entirely un-American. Okay.
But the middle class health insurance plans didn't really do a whole lot before Obamacare, because they get boxed for having a pre-existing condition or something they couldn't afford to pay for their health care.
Okay. So that's a very specific case, and then we're reducing this debate again. We're reducing this all the time to the needs of the few outweighing the needs of the many. And this is all that this debate is ever going to be reduced if you have it in a situation where it's cosmetic socialism. This is all this is. Do you want the beneficial of a free enterprise society where everybody becomes better off, as it has done under Reagan's policies, as it has done under many free enterprise government policies in the world, or you can have a situation where you tax people to the point where consumption is guided and it just becomes big government, and you have a situation like here or anything where just government becomes bloated and it's just simply a demonstrative figure in society. So when it comes down to whether or not you want to have a say in what you want and have an opportunity to live out the American dream, the only way you can do that is through Mitt Romney. If you go with Obama, people will be taxed to the point where their American dream is the American dream that's decided upon by the lowest in society, controlling the lowest amount of resources, controlling some designed and socialised opinion that just doesn't exist, and it won't exist in America. So I beg the House to oppose, don't elect Mitt Romney, and don't allow your preconceived notions of what Mitt Romney is colour you in this debate. Thank you very much for listening.
Ladies, now we'll have our second speaker, Team Obama, and our first guest of the evening, Director of the Institute for American Studies at UCD, Professor Ian Kennedy.
Thanks a lot. I'm enjoying this already. And to be welcomed into socialist Ireland to talk about America. Utterly bemusing, but fascinating. We were told not to have assumptions about Mitt Romney, but it's hard to have assumptions about somebody who flip-flops on a daily basis. How would we make those assumptions? They wouldn't be on firm ground. But let me come to Mitt Romney in a moment. One of the reasons I'm really delighted with such passion in talking about America in this country is I think it still matters to us. No matter which president you're going to vote for, this country matters to us in Ireland. And I think it matters in the West, it matters in Europe. I want to start by saying a little bit about that. Every time there's a US election, or at least I would say every time since, let's say, President Kennedy, there's been a sort of a referendum at the same time on the state of the nation. What Americans do is they look inwards. They think about who we are, what we mean, what's the idea of America. That's part and parcel of that media fishbowl that runs for a very, very long time. But I think we outside are also looking at America and wondering the same thing. We invest a lot in this country, not just financially, but in terms of dreams, desires, assumptions, fears, and much else. And I think that we all know that. You remember what happened 4 years ago when Obama won? I'm guessing some of you felt pretty good about that. There was even some euphoria in this country. I dare say a lot of that euphoria is because Bush lost. But nonetheless, there's an investment, and that's something that's worth thinking through a little bit. We can talk about the economy and other things, but I think that that's something that's quite deep in this country. So there's a couple of things I'd like to look at here. On the one hand, okay, that great swelling of emotion around Obama has receded. We can look at him more rationally, we can look at him more coolly, we can say what has he done in the last 4 years. And I want to do a little bit of that. But at the same time as we do that, let's also remember that the Bush administration left a misbegotten legacy, not just for the United States, but for the world. That's a pretty good starting point. And there's no point in saying we can simply forget that. Where is Bush in this current election? The Republicans won't mention him. He has disappeared like somebody in Stalinist Russia. He doesn't exist because they cannot afford to use his name. They cannot afford to remind Americans what they did to the nation, what they did to the world. And the same things, I fear, will happen again if Governor Romney is elected as president. So, how would I rate Obama in his 4 years? Not excellent, but good enough. I'm sorry if it doesn't sound strong, but it's good enough to get re-elected. So there's 4 areas I would say he's been good enough on. The first is the economy. We've heard a little bit about that. The American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, better known as the stimulus bill, $768 billion, I think, when it first was pushed forward. It's more now. Reset the course of the economy. It reversed the jobless trend. 3.6 million are now working in the private sector that were not working there before in the last 3 years. Investment in infrastructure. More investment in infrastructure than any president since Eisenhower, who built the highways. Bailed out the auto industry. You may recall that Governor Romney was opposed to the bailout of the auto industry. And in fact, that has got him into a lot of trouble in the last couple of days, where he has been on record as saying that Chrysler are on the verge of taking Jeep production to China. And he's had to backtrack because it's been proven that that was not the case. And in fact, the head of Chrysler came out in the last 24 hours to say that that was basically a lie. So this will haunt him, what he did to the auto industry, or failed to do to the auto industry, I think especially in Ohio. Green energy is something else that Obama's been pushing. We haven't heard much about it. Republicans don't like it, but I think it's very important as investment in the future. Student aid programs, also very important. Students are better off in terms of aid for the support of poorer students in the United States because of what he has done. Moving on quickly, and I'm skipping over here the importance, for example, of Wall Street reform, which he also pushed through, to the next, or the second of the key points where he has done more than well enough, and that is in health reform. We should not underestimate this. No, it's not universal reform. Universal reform could not have got through Congress. He's a realist, and he worked hard to get through what he got through. 5 presidents failed to do this before he did. And when we rewrite the history of America in the 21st century, this will be an important point. And no, it will not be easy to repeal even if the Republicans get through, not least because they'll likely lose the Senate. The third area I would point to hasn't really been mentioned before, but this is one I feel personally strongly about, and that's civil rights. This is a president who cares deeply about civil rights, but he has not put it forward as a coherent policy program. What he's done is take a number of issues and in a piecemeal fashion, he's created very important legislation. Within days of being appointed, he sat down in the White House and he signed the Lilly-Ledbetter Act. That act was created to provide protection for minorities, women and disabled people in terms of wage discrimination. That was the mark of the man in terms of civil rights, and he's moved forward in a whole range of areas beyond that. I'm not ready yet, thank you. Fourth is foreign policy. It's already been mentioned, but I think it needs mentioning again. Just a few points beyond what we've heard. Yes, he came in with a rhetoric that didn't stand up to analysis, the rhetoric of multilateralism and reconciliation. Well, people didn't want to work with him, and the people in the United States didn't give him support to fulfill that particular rhetoric. But he did some important things. He gave a speech in Cairo in 2009 that I did think set a benchmark for a new vision of America on the global stage. And I think that a lot of people in the world were very pleased and excited about that, and that matters. He's removed a lot of the stigma of the Bush administration from the world stage. That counts for something. He has, as he said, removed the combat troops from Iraq. He's in the process of pulling them out from Afghanistan. They will be wound down by 2014, at which point there will still be a large American presence in Afghanistan. Yes?
Okay, you're saying a lot about civil rights. Could you explain why you still support Obama when he's willing to sign a bill into law that allows him to incarcerate American citizens without trial, essentially on a whim?
On a whim, not on a whim. There's a long history behind that. This, after all, is a man who promised he would try and close down Guantanamo. His failure to do so is not his failure. It's the lack of people in Congress who will not work with him. So to simply point to the man and say he's failed on those grounds, if you want to talk about a moral failure with Obama, I'll give you my example. The area where I am deeply, deeply distressed about the Obama administration is around the use of drones. I think it's entirely unacceptable. On the other hand, I don't think the Republicans would have done anything different, and that's why I'm afraid I'm giving him a bit of a pass, and I'm very uncomfortable in doing it, because I think the liberal press give him a pass around drone strikes. The New York Times gives him a pass, and that really should be analysed. But I'm here to speak for Obama, so just skip the last few minutes. I didn't say that. I'm just being honest. So very quickly, foreign policy. I know I've got very little time here. Removing of combat troops, he agreed. He has pushed Congress to agree 487 million defence cuts over the next 10 years. I mean, that's a terrific move, I think, that he brokered with allies on both sides of the House, as it were. In case you haven't noticed, he was responsible for killing bin Laden. More than that, and here I contradict myself, he has also managed to behead, symbolically and literally, many of the leaders of Al-Qaeda. It has been done. I'm very upset with how it's been done, but it has been done, and many Americans are very happy with that, as you're probably aware. He's also carried out things we don't hear much about. Strategic arms deal with Russia, which I think will prove to be very important as time goes on. And I would just repeat that one more time. He has relieved a large measure of the suffering and shame about the United States caused by that country around the world under the Bush administration. And that is something we should all be grateful for in our lifetimes. The last one is vision. That's the blurry feel-good one, okay? Vision. I think he has one. I'm probably not in the majority in saying that, but I think he has. I think he's got a good political temperament. Yes, he went to sleep in the first of the discussions. He should have been more awake. But generally, he's a very rational, cool head, and I think that's counted for a lot. He's got a sense of fairness and integrity, which I certainly respect. But what I really admire is that he believes in an ideal of America, where I started. An America that's about social justice, tolerance, and equality. That is clear blue water between him and Romney. Absolutely clear blue water. He believes in committing to the public interest and investment. Romney believes in committing to private equity. That's the difference to keep in mind when the election comes up. Thank you.
Now we have our first guest on the side of Team Romney, Chair of Republican Broad Ireland and Coleman.
Thank you very much for having me. I've sat through many minutes but never in my life have I heard minutes nearly as interesting as the minutes I got to hear today. I wish they'd start doing that over in government agencies across the pond, but I doubt that people would have the skill to be able to pull that off. So, Romney, Arguing Why Obama Doesn't Deserve a Second Term is a book that writes itself, okay? He didn't deserve to win in 2008, let alone 2012. And unfortunately, the last 4 years have proven my point regarding 2008. And this goes twofold, for domestic and foreign policy. For domestic policy, sure, he passed a stimulus, but almost all of that money went to Democratic cronies or Democrat constituents, okay? They went to keep certain state employees in state governments that were already over budgeted, keep them in their jobs a little bit longer. But when the money runs out, there's the same economic problem that you had in 2009 as in 2011 or 2012. It really didn't do anything except for transfer some money to some people who already had jobs, working for the government of all things, not for the private sector. The same thing goes with green initiatives. Do you know who got all of these billion-dollar loan guarantees and direct loans from the Department of Energy? You think it was just someone who had a good idea when it came to green energy? No, it was the mega donors to the Democratic Party who got these loan guarantees. They paid themselves bonuses, they laid off their workers, and then they declared bankruptcy. It's an absolute disgrace, not to mention a tremendous waste of money. When you get into health care, it's an awful bill, period. It doesn't matter if you're for government health care or not. If you look at it, people don't even know what it means. But they do know that it punishes employers who hire more employees. Okay? So it's a massive drag on the economy. Yes, sir?
Does it punish those with pre-existing conditions, though?
Pre-existing conditions continues to be a problem. Okay? Because as far as I understand, if a firm still doesn't go above 50 employees, they somehow get to opt out. But if they get into the 50th employee, then and they don't have a health insurance plan of some sort, which will cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, all right, from going from the 49th employee to the 50th employee, then they get an actual penalty. So, I mean, there's other ways to address pre-existing conditions. I've had people in my own family who have pre-existing condition problems with their insurance. The insurance setup in healthcare is a disaster, and it's a disaster. It was a disaster before the healthcare bill. Now it's even worse because it's got government more involved. It's got employers more involved in this tax-free provision of healthcare, which is one of the reasons why the costs are exploding, because it's always a third party that's paying for it. So, to answer your question, I mean, it's a problem. It was a problem from the beginning. It was badly designed. The more the government gets involved in it, the worse it gets, because there's all these unintended consequences. It's also a violation of civil rights, period. If they can force you to supposedly buy some product, right, and they call it, if they're going to call it a tax, or if they're not going to call it a tax, depending on whatever legal loophole they're trying to jump through, it can be applied to anything. If I was a Democrat, I'd be quite concerned, because I wouldn't want some Republicans coming up with some crazy scheme to have me buying something. Maybe you have to buy a machine gun and provide, keep it in your house. Sir?
You're saying it's a violation of civil rights. Did the Supreme Court agree with that?
Well, for one thing, I don't know if the Supreme Court agreed with it as far as the simple question there, that simple point. But the reasoning of Justice Roberts is absolute crap. It's crap. None of the judges said that it could be a tax. No judge that looked at it ever considered it to be a tax. He came up with it because he has this philosophy that, the Congress gets the right, I'm not going to interfere, which disturbs me, period. I don't know why Bush appoints judges like that. I'd like to see judges on the right and the left invalidating more laws. That's their role. I don't know why they just roll over for Congress when they come up with these crazy bills that they don't even read. I mean, it's 2,500 pages long. Young lady, you had a question as well?
So Romney, you are aware that, in Massachusetts, where Romney was governor, the healthcare bill was essentially, in place, not staying.
It was a nice try, okay? I lived in Massachusetts. It was actually right before then. It was a nice try, but it didn't do any of the things it promised to do. It didn't lower costs. It didn't lower the amount of people that would go to the emergency, which costs a lot of money compared to if they just had insurance, you'd think they'd go to the doctor. It didn't do any of that stuff. And it's bankrupting the state. The difference is, try it at the state level if you want. We're talking about the federal government. We got, as you know, in the states, you got the municipal government has a much more active and actual, responsible role compared to Ireland. And then you have the county. Then you have the state, which could be a massive government. I mean, much larger than, depending on what state we're talking about, much larger than the country of Ireland. And you got the federal government on top of that. So moving on, foreign policy. Someone who reported here described Obama foreign policy as being quite calm. He described this after the whole Libya debacle. I mean, it's calm like, you know, the driver of a bus who just fell asleep at the wheel and he hasn't driven off the highway yet. Yeah, you feel nice and, oh, that's a warm feeling, oh, it feels so nice. Smash, you go right through the guardrail and everyone's dead. All right? A bit hyperbolic, but what can I say? But it's a serious issue, right? Right now we got Obama on TV. He looks very nice. He looks very pretty. He looks very handsome. He's got that great smile because he gets to go on TV, talk about the disaster, all right? He doesn't do anything to help with the disaster at all. All he does is write checks. But this is what he's good at. I'm sorry, not right now. This is what he's good at, right? He's good at going on TV and playing president. That's why he was such an excellent candidate in 2008, and that's why he's been such a crap president since 2008. In Libya, we actually have to make some hard calls, and I'm not necessarily blaming him personally, although there may be evidence that perhaps he was viewing this whole attack as it was going on, and then they came up with this crazy story about how some mob, simply because that's what happened in Cairo, all right? He could have decided to go and rescue those people or not, all right? And apparently, he just kicked the can down the road, or he deferred to his defense secretary, who didn't feel like he had the authority to do it either. I'm sorry. Not right now. That's a major abrogation of presidential responsibility. It's easy to get on TV touring around New Jersey talking about how you're going to write a check to fix some power plant, but those are the decisions where things could have gone wrong for him, and it would have looked very bad, and he knows that. Only thinking about his campaign, he decided not to make any decisions at all, so those people could fight for 7 hours and get overrun and get killed. All right, and the next morning, what does he do? He flies off to a campaign event in Las Vegas. If a Republican had done that, he would have been crucified, absolutely crucified, and rightly so. So, therefore, yes?
You said that President Obama did nothing in the disaster in New Jersey. So, does that mean you're calling Republican governor of New Jersey, who praised Obama's efforts there, are you calling him a liar?
Well, it's great. I mean, it's great the president got on the plane and he flew out there and he got off the plane and he goes around shaking a bunch of people's hands and saying, hey, you know, this is all the resources you can have. But he's not actually managing anything. You see what I'm saying? What decision is he making? Is he making a decision, hey, there's some people stuck in this house over there, let's go, you know, launch a rescue operation or not? No, he's not. He's not doing anything except for releasing resources.
Didn't he make the decision not to try and cut FEMA, who are actually doing something?
Not to cut FEMA? Well, I don't think the man could cut anything. I mean, he's run trillion-dollar deficits every year. We're talking about $1 trillion. Okay, Bush was bad. He was a bad spender, especially when they had both houses were in Republican control. The most he ever spent, as far as the deficit goes, was $400 billion. Obama got in $1.85 trillion the first year. $1.85 trillion. It's been over $1 trillion every single year. He has absolutely no concept of reining that in whatsoever. It's just funny money. The Chinese aren't even buying our bonds anymore. Okay, now the Federal Reserve buys Treasury bonds. The Federal Reserve, and you know how they do that? Well, they don't actually print the money anymore. They simply come up with electronic serial numbers and say, hey, we're buying, you know, $40 billion worth. It doesn't mean anything. It's a complete sham. Which brings us into why it's better for Ireland if Romney is elected. Okay? One, if he can get back to a stronger dollar, then that's much better for purchasing power parity, so the United States can buy more Irish exports, which, as you know, there's about 25 to 30% of exports. Yes?
We did a survey on Irish people a few days ago, and 79% said they would vote for Obama if they could.
Well, okay, fair enough. I mean, we're talking about in Ireland, all right, you're listening to the news and you're listening about Republicans, and who's describing the Republican position to you? A Democrat, okay? And why do people actually, and this goes, I'm not a Tea Partier myself, but why do people in Ireland think that the Tea Party has anything to do with social issues? In fact, they've carefully avoided taking any position on social issues. They're talking about budgetary issues because they know if they get into the whole social mess, that it'll break up the coalition of the people they have going along trying to get support to lower the deficit, trying to rein in federal government. I think because the Democrat media likes to rip out the bugaboo of you know, these social conservatives in order to get some cheap points and get some cheap support. If Romney were to win, what would be the difference when it comes to social issues? There'd be no difference whatsoever. It would have no role in people's lives whatsoever, with the exception that Obama has written he's gotten his health and human services people to write a regulation whereby employers would have to pay for abortion-inducing drugs, you know, for their employees, and that includes religious organizations. He'd probably do away with it. I think it's pretty obvious he'd do away with that regulation, but that regulation clearly violates the First Amendment. It doesn't matter if you're pro-abortion or not. It just makes me very uncomfortable, the government taking that sort of power and making those sort of decisions. So getting back to Ireland, it's also better for Ireland if Romney, although now it's probably too late, if there's a way to deal with Iran going nuclear. Obama completely dropped the ball. I don't know if you remember, but in 2009 there was the Green Revolution. That was the first one in the Middle East. You know, it wasn't Syria, it wasn't Libya. That was the first one. What did Obama do? He didn't do anything. But not only that, he actually engaged the regime right after that when they were imprisoning and murdering their own dissidents, their own citizens, to re-legitimize them. Therefore, I ask this House to say that Obama has to go.
History and Political Science graduate, ex-jury, and as of tonight, honorary member of the bill, Aidan Sherry.
As I'm sure you can all tell by now, American politics is a very personal matter to all of us in this debate. Politics in the United States is sometimes a blood sport, with shots flung fast and loose from both sides. And while I normally think divisiveness discourages voters and makes both sides look bad, I can understand why Americans are so heated about this election. Americans are frustrated. The change Obama promised is slower than anticipated. But let me remind you, that's due to the economic problems caused by a Republican president, okay? Same party as Romney, okay? No one's mentioning that. But this is no reason to vote in a corporate dinosaur who wants to hack the government and social progress to pieces. Now, I 100% supported Obama in his 2008 bid for president. However, I could have lived with the idea of John McCain as president. He's a moderate, well-reasoned Republican who I could have trusted to not run the country into the ground. However, Romney is a different kind of Republican. As the Republican base moves right due to growing radicalization of the Christian right, Romney's policy views pose a personal threat to young Americans like myself, especially young women. First, I want to talk about what an Obama re-election means to young people, in particular his policy strengths in education. No, thank you. Then I will talk about how Romney's reproductive health care and abortion policies set women's rights back by 40 years. Okay, so first, what an Obama win means for young people like ourselves. Obama is working hard to ensure that young people can pursue an education regardless of income, and once they graduate, there'll be job opportunities available to them. Obama understands that not every parent can afford to spend $50,000 to send their kids to college, like Mitt Romney's parents did. Romney takes that for granted and attempts to make cuts in what he deems unnecessary spending, i.e. Pell Grant funding for students, so that's similar to the grant system here. On the other hand, Obama recognizes that students won't make a lot of money right away, so he allows students to repay loans in accordance with their income. And then after 20 years, if they haven't made that, they're working on those policies at the moment. So he's actually understanding that you don't need to pay everything up front. Okay, so while Romney is full of platitudes about the importance of education, Obama stakes the country's future on it. He knows the key to economic success is the development of a smart economy, and he focuses on advancements in tech and green initiatives as a result. While the Romney plan is about cutting and limiting government involvement, Obama's plan is about growth and using government resources to jumpstart people's opportunities. Okay? So now ask yourself, which plan allows you to sink and which plan allows you to swim? Personally, I feel like I have a greater chance at career success with Obama at the helm because he truly understands, protects, and motivates young people. So secondly, as the only woman in this debate, I feel the need to talk about women's rights. I believe that we are close to or at complete equality with men. And if Romney is elected president, I'm worried that women's rights could potentially backslide. Here's why. Obama believes that women should make their own decisions when it comes to their bodies, that the government should not interfere with contraceptive measures, the difficult choice to have an abortion, pap smears, etc. Okay, now the church takes issue with this, and as the religious right grows in strength, the freedom to make these lifestyle decisions might go away. Romney wants to cut all funding for Planned Parenthood. For those who are not familiar, Planned Parenthood is a women's health center that provides low-cost care to low-income areas. I'll take you in a second. Romney's main problem with Planned Parenthood is that they perform abortions, which is currently a legal right in the United States, that actually Romney can't overturn, only the Supreme Court can. So he will do everything, since he can't ban it outright, he will do everything in his power to inhibit access to it. But Planned Parenthood provides life-saving cancer screenings, STI tests, sex education, and counseling to women in need. Abortion is only a small part of that. I mean, they're sometimes the only place in the local community where you can seek any care whatsoever. Yes?
You think when we make decisions to vote for politicians, we can view the hierarchy of importance, that the need needs to be focused on economics, not necessarily just social policy.
I'm worried. Like, there's a reason I'm living here in Ireland at the moment. I'm worried that, like, if Romney is cutting left, right, and center, like women's reproductive rights, I mean, I don't understand how that can be avoided, like that can be an issue that we just choose to ignore. I mean, the economy, as I've said, the change, you can tell that there's already been, like, there's been economic change and there's growth, but Obama's plan is much more over long-term sort of economic growth. It's not short-term gains right away. That's what increasing spending and decreasing the debt does, but it doesn't actually generate any sort of growth, I think. So Romney, influenced by his religious conviction instead of what's best for women, would rather throw it all away than allow women to evaluate their own choices. Okay, so this is just my conclusion. It all comes down to different philosophies. If you believe in cuts to government programs such as welfare spending and healthcare, vote Romney. If you believe in a dog-eat-dog world where people must fend for themselves, vote Romney. Just as a quick example, and this was talked about in the debate, Romney wants to cut federal emergency disaster funding and leave all of the recovery effort up to individual states. So that's essentially asking Louisiana to single-handedly cover the $100 billion in damages caused by Hurricane Katrina, only then to pay for damages in the BP oil disaster 5 years later. Just because the state has the misfortune of being on the coast and hit by hurricanes every year, does that really mean that they have to now fund all of that themselves? Okay, so in this instance, we have to question what the country would look like if Romney was president during Hurricane Sandy instead of Obama. Okay, so 1 second. I think Obama is a perfect combination of conviction and common sense. He puts the American people first and foremost in his mind when making tough decisions. I wonder what factors will influence Romney when he's faced with a difficult decision. Is it his Mormon church? His corporate friends? It certainly won't be the 47% of Americans who are dependent on the government. So vote Obama, and just as a reminder, if you vote Obama, you also get Michelle. It's like a 2-for-1 deal, so thank you. Thanks.
Because she's worried about it in America. I don't exactly seem to be the best here then. But then on to some of the other speakers' points. I think they're actually being very nice to Obama, and everyone is actually generally very nice to Obama when it comes to his advocate for civil rights. Yeah, in America, sure, maybe he's great for it, but in other countries not so much. You seem to remember Egypt, his administration weren't exactly fast out of the block in support of the guy, support against Mubarak, because Mubarak was their ally, which has always been a problem of mine with America, where they just think they can, they have a bit of double standards where they don't like some dictators. Once dictators are on their side, that's fine, they can, do whatever they want. And then on to the healthcare, where people are saying, oh, it's great, the pre-existing conditions there. Yeah, sure, it is great, but it's more the lies they come out with to support it. I mean, reduce costs. How can you possibly reduce costs in insurance by forcing everyone to get it, putting the pre-existing conditions into it? It's only going to increase costs. They don't control these insurance companies who are just going to raise prices. It's like in Europe where they're like, oh, we'll make women's and men's insurance, the same. You can't differentiate. But what they then do is they just raise women's up and, reduce men's slightly because you have to cover the cost. It's like, I think most places in the EU, the young cover the costs for the old in it. So it's a bit of a lie. Anyway, onto the economy, which is really the main thing that the Americans care about. They aren't that worried, like they're a bit worried about foreign policy, but the main thing that all the Americans are basing this vote on is the economy. Because Obama seems to have, he's a bit flippy-floppy, and he's not very good at going across the aisles to get things going. Sorry. He's staunch in his views and refuses to go across the aisles. That's the economy and why Mitt Romney would be great for it. Everyone they keep going on about how he's gonna make the rich richer. But they forget that he's actually leaving the tax cuts in place for everyone else as well. So he's not making them better or worse off. And also his plans for tax cuts are only going to make them better off because it's going to improve employment. For instance, one of his main ones is reducing corporation tax in America. It's no wonder really the Irish should be in support of Obama, because if he does that, you know, a couple of the companies might actually up and go back there, because they actually have one of the highest corporation taxes in the world at the moment, which encourages companies who are very mobile now, like these tech companies. They're very mobile and can just say, oh, well, we don't like this tax rate, we'll just go somewhere else and do the tax somewhere else. It's like the Irish Times report a couple of weeks ago found that most of these tech companies don't even patent their thing, like they patent them in America and then move it somewhere else so they can get a lower tax rate. So America aren't even getting a lot of the money from these things which they say, oh, Obama's in great support of it. But they're not getting the benefits from it because they're just shifting a lot of these patents somewhere else and then paying the tax and, you know, those like in the tax havens. His lower tax rates can only improve the economy by improving consumer spending. Sure, it makes the rich richer, but it makes everyone else better off as well, because the rich can then afford to provide employment. Because it's not the least well off in the economy that are going to get kick-started. The problem with most LEDCs isn't that they're poor, it's that the rich don't do anything and aren't proactive enough in getting those countries started. So you need the rich to have money, which is again another problem with the, as a colleague here mentioned, with the Obamacare, that he forces the employers to pay for the medical costs, which is something that Romney's going to change. And everyone seems to be worried about it. He's not changing a huge amount in the Obamacare. He said, yeah, he likes bits and he changed bits, which is important. I mean, there's obviously some things which, like the costs and all that, which are a bit dodgy. Then on to Romney as a politician. Everyone complains that he's, well, you know, he flip-flops, changes his opinion like at the drop of a hat, which he does seem to do a lot. But I see it's like, you know, the biggest flaw in the world. The Americans are kind of renowned for having the two houses, like as is the case in Obama's last 2 years or whatever it is. He's had one house Democrat, one house Republican, which makes it very difficult for him to enact the change which he wants. Whereas if you have someone who's a bit more flexible, like Romney, there would actually be an advantage, because the views, you can say, yeah, I will concede this view if you give me this, which is how politics unfortunately works. You can't go in like Obama seems to with shuttered vision and just go bang on head that he is doing this, which is why he kind of failed in most of the things I see that he's tried to do, which seem positive, but his principled views are a flaw which Romney doesn't possess, which is why you should vote Romney.
Obama will have a share of Democrats who are independents.
Good evening. It's my pleasure to spend some time at the Phil this evening and share with you some of my thoughts on Tuesday's election. Thank you for inviting me. We've seen over the past several months hundreds of millions of dollars spent on every conceivable kind of advertising to persuade American voters to cast their ballots for either Mitt Romney or Barack Obama. There have been thousands of feet on the ground as well, knocking on doors, distributing flyers, doing all of the local work that every election, big or small, entails. And those feet have been on the ground for a long time. About 100 years ago, the mayor of Boston was an Irishman named James Michael Curley, who was generally regarded as one of two things, a hero or a scoundrel. An author named James Beatty wrote a book about Curley called The Rascal King, in which he related this feet-on-the-ground story about a local Boston election. A young man was campaigning for his candidate for the Boston City Council and knocked on the door of one of the triple-deckers in Dorchester. An Irish woman answered the door, and the young man launched into his pitch for the candidate. The Irish woman listened for a while, and then said, "I heard if your man gets elected, the first thing he's going to do is set up his sister with a nice job over at the telephone company." The young man went to considerable length to assure the lady that the candidate would never use the powers of his office for the personal benefit of family members. To which the woman replied, well, if the son of a bitch isn't going to help out his own sister, why the hell should I vote? Billions of dollars, and a century later, are we any better at campaigning than that young man? We have an incumbent president saddled with an unemployment rate that spent nearly 4 years above 8% in an economy that won't grow fast enough. We have a challenger with an extensive business record and a modest political one who doesn't want to talk about either one. Rather than touting his own bona fides, Mitt Romney and his millionaire friends have instead attacked Barack Obama with lies and distortions, while Mitt panders to his wealthy supporters by bad-mouthing an alleged 47% of Americans who sponge off the government. While we generally accept that Romney will say anything to anyone to get more money and support, the tape of this speech to wealthy donors gives us a glimpse into what may be the true Mitt, a self-entitled prick who disregards those he views as beneath him, which includes just about everybody. The issues in this campaign have been well covered elsewhere. We need to talk about the character of these two men running for president, who they are, and how they have been shaped into what they are today. President Obama was born in Hawaii to a white woman from Kansas. Except for a 2-week visit when he was 10 years old, his father was not a presence in his life. Young Barack lived with his mom, Ann Dunn, and his grandparents in somewhat uneven intervals. When he was 4, his mom married an Indonesian man, and 2 years later, they went off to live in his homeland. Things went well enough for young Barack there. He attended Indonesian language schools up through 4th grade. And then he returned to Hawaii in 5th grade, and he lived with his grandparents. A year later, his mom and his baby sister Maya rejoined him in Hawaii, and they lived together for the next 3 years while mom completed her graduate work. When Ann Dunham returned to Indonesia with Maya, Barack chose to stay in Hawaii with his grandparents. So here he was in the Aloha State, a black teenager with his white grandparents on an island with loads of Hawaiians, Caucasians, Japanese, and not a whole lot of other black kids. Obama later wrote in his memoir that the variety of cultures that he experienced became an integral part of his worldview and the basis for values that he holds most dear. Obama attended the Punahou School from 5th grade to his graduation in 1979. Punahou is an elite college prep school that embodies the ideal of opportunity. Obama was there on a scholarship that required him to work part-time in his teen years, which he did at the local Baskin-Robbins ice cream shop. One of his best friends was a Democrat suffrage colleague of mine named Wayne Wakeman, a middle-class kid at the time on a scholarship who now lives in Cambodia. Wayne recalls their circle of friends, 8 of them, who referred to themselves as the Chum Gang, a slang name that referred to pot smoking. Half of the group were basketball players and the rest were wrestlers. And what is notable about them is what happened after high school. They all went on to successful careers, and none of them have government jobs or government contracts. What Barack and Wayne have in common is that they were middle-class kids who got a shot because of their scholarships to that school, and they made the most of it. I have no doubt this is why educational opportunity for all young Americans is so important to Barack Obama. While Barack Obama spent his high school years hanging with the Chum Gang in Hawaii, playing basketball, working at Baskin-Robbins, and recreating with his pals, Mitt Romney had his own experience with diversity at a prep school called Cranbrook. Matthew Friedman, a close friend of Romney's when he was a senior at Cranbrook, recalls an incident that occurred a few months before graduation. Romney was incensed with a younger student named John Lauber, who was effeminate and had bleached blonde hair that draped over one eye. Romney's words were, "He can't look like that. That's wrong. Just look at him." Romney took action. He formed a posse of similar jerks, chased down Lauber, tackled him, and pinned him down while he repeatedly clipped his hair with scissors. Lauber's eyes filled with tears, and he screamed for help. In later years, Lauber came out as gay and led a somewhat of a vagabond life, working as an embalmer and as a chef aboard freighters and in Bosnia and Iraq during the war's day. She also spent time in a psychiatric hospital in Kansas after an extreme fit of temper in front of his mother and sister. He died of liver cancer in 2004. David Seed was one of the Cranbrook students who participated in the attack. He bumped into Lava at an airport in 1990, and he apologized to him. Lava told him how frightened he had been, and that the hair-cutting incident was horrible for him, and he had thought about it a lot since then. Mitt Romney claims he does not recall the incident. Mitt Romney likes to tout himself as a family man, and often puts his wife and 5 sons on display. What were things like in the Romney household as the boys were growing up? We have a glimpse of that from Peter Brower, who, as a 7-year-old friend of Mitt's youngest son, Craig, went on his very first sleepover at the Romney house. After Peter was dropped off by his mom, Mitt and Ann Romney left the house and went off to some function, while Peter and Craig, and they left Peter and Craig in the care of Craig's older brothers, Josh and Matt. Matt was 16 at the time. The older boys were so rotten to him, locking him in a room to watch a horror film, Friday the 13th, Part 6, that was extremely inappropriate for a young boy, that Peter called his mom to come and get him. She did, and when Mitt and Ann returned home, Peter was gone. Do you think they might have called the parents of this 7-year-old who was in their care? Think again. They never called Peter's parents to find out what happened, or if the kid was okay, or to apologize. This avoidance, this lack of accountability, goes right to the heart of the pompous bully that is Mitt Romney. Another colleague of mine from Democrats Abroad in Holland named Bob shared a story about meeting then Senator Barack Obama in Washington. Obama was going around the room, and when he met Bob, he asked him where he was from. Bob replied that he lived in Holland. Senator Obama asked him why, and Bob explained that he's gay, and the U.S. does not allow him to bring his partner, to whom he is legally married, into the country on a permanent basis. Senator Obama looked him in the eye and said, "That's not right." He began to walk away to the next person and then came back to Bob and said, "That's not right." After listening to Bob tell this story, it came as no surprise to me several months later when President Obama came out in favor of gay marriage. Mitt Romney, of course, is not. And beyond that, he is incapable of displaying towards Bob the empathy that Barack Obama did. Barack Obama and Mitt Romney well embody the words of my history professor back in the day at the University of Massachusetts. His name was Dean Johnson, and in the opening moments of his first class, he loudly asserted, time and again, throughout history, history has shown that those on the left were right, and those on the right were assholes. No more assholes in the White House. We have the opportunity to vote for a president with integrity, honor, and courage. A genuine human being with not only smarts, but warmth and compassion. Mitt Romney is not that man. Barack Obama is.
Speaker there was essentially like, here are a few incidents of like negative things that Mitt Romney has done. Let's assume that he is a monster from there. Like, come on. Like, it is nonsensical to suggest that from those stories we should be able to extrapolate his entire character, when in fact we can see from his other behavior in his personal life that he is both a loving father and a servant of his community when he acts like under the aegis of like his church and seeking to like give up days of his life to do that. We say that like that isn't really what this debate should be about. Like, demonizing him as an individual in that way is just ridiculous. I mean, like, come on, okay? Like, Jesus. Like, also, sorry, just like the stuff about the gay marriage stuff. Like he had to say Obama came out in favor of it because he hadn't been until very recently, like flip-flopping on that side as well. So let's talk about a few things this evening. I'm going to talk about sort of this election in the context of social policy. I'm going to talk about sort of economics, particularly how this election campaign has challenged economic sacred cows that have not been challenged by either side until this election. And thirdly, I'm going to talk about foreign policy, why in fact Obama's foreign policy and the president's foreign policy has to always be considered the most indicative of a president's character as a president, because of the fact that they have the most significant control over that, as opposed to things like domestic policy. So let's talk about social policy, because we were told a lot by the proposition particularly already about abortion, about gay rights. And is Romney's position on abortion and gay rights misguided? Is he probably waging a war on women to an extent, and is the Republican Party doing that? Yes, they are. That's it's true. But we have to consider things ultimately in a hierarchy of both rights and decisions, and within the framework of understanding that circumstances have to dictate our behavior given our present circumstance, that we are in fact still in a recession, still in a very significant economic problem. Because it is absolutely true that it would be better if we had a Mitt Romney whose economic and foreign policy was identical, but he was significantly socially more liberal. That would be better, undoubtedly. But that's not the choice, unfortunately, that Americans, are faced with. Because the choice is rather instead between a candidate who offers solutions which are hard, but at least have potential to restore the economic balance in America, and a president whose solutions will not offer any egress from the poverty facing America. But I would say about Obama's social policy and his attitude towards civil rights. I'd point out that President Obama has expanded the Patriot Act. He has signed a bill that massively curtails civil rights beyond any president before him. He has given himself and the federal government the power to incarcerate American citizens without trial indefinitely. That sort of power that he has given himself is a monstrous act. And to simply say that he is a moral actor who won't use it for wrong, come on, he has done that and necessarily will give that to the next Republican president, who I presume you guys don't want to be elected, generally speaking. Giving him that power is ridiculous. Since the beginning of the left-right divide between the Democrats and Republicans, Republican presidents have had a tendency to decrease civil rights, whereas Democrats seek to expand them. Obama was the first Democratic president in history who in aggregate has actually sought to limit the freedoms of individuals within the United States. This is a significant sea change in American policy and represents a significant problem for the American people in that they now have two parties that want to take away their rights in that way. That by rewarding Obama with re-election only serves to instantiate that furthermore in the party. Let's talk about economics now. Because this is very important to consider, not just economics generally, but the specifics that have faced the election as we see it. Because for both parties, there have been some things that have been essentially untouchable due to their political volatility, things like Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. What Romney and Ryan do is challenge these things, whether you consider them to be correct in their prescriptions of what they suggest isn't really the question. The point is that they've actually provided a genuine challenge to the current situation, which is essentially, we'll keep doing what we're doing until we go broke. And when we have a situation where these policies and these programs are going to eventually collapse, we need to actually provide some sort of change that will allow them to proceed into the future. And when Mr. Kennedy tells us, essentially, that this is a question of public investment versus private equity, that all that is this, the same sort of despicable demonization of the private sector that Obama and his supporters have perpetuated. When we consider that the private sector can indeed provide jobs, we shouldn't try to attack them as that. Obama's failures have been a multitude. In terms of infrastructural projects that we've been told about, these have largely failed. His high-speed railways haven't happened and no one wants them. His student aid doesn't help to fight the rising costs of students. His green energy policies have also been bust. and that his Wall Street reform has been abysmal insofar as that it hasn't actually provided any real change. In terms of public health care, all it has done effectively is to enrich insurance companies. It doesn't serve to actually do the noble thing, which is to provide affordable health care for Americans. Thirdly and finally, the people have come to hear me speak. I'm going to finish this point. In terms of Obama's foreign policy, it's essentially monstrous, and it's most indicative of his individual decision-making process. Because he has more free reign in foreign policy than anywhere else. His drone strikes are terrifying. Look, he's slaughtering Pakistanis, he targets American citizens, he has a kill list. Would you trust Bush or any Republican president to have a kill list? The fact that you let him away with that is ridiculous. We move to support Romney over this guy.
And then from Team Obama, we'll have senior graduate in history of political science students, current program of the bill at Coleman.
Right, so, ladies and gentlemen of the University Philosophical Society, ladies and gentlemen, I apologise for looking like I'm a Republican going to a fundraiser in Florida. That's because I was expecting a better reception for that joke, but 47% of you didn't laugh, but that's fine. So before I start, I'm just going to say, first of all, I'm unusual in Team Obama in that I actually don't like Obama that much, but besides, I think that is the choice that we've been dealt with this election. This is a really terrible election because we have two pretty bad choices. Obama's presidency has been the definition of meh, and but I think Romney's presidency would be even meh-er, if you will. So I'm just going to go into some rebuttal first. Our friend Damien kicked off the debate and he talked a lot of figures. He talked about Romney's tax affairs, which was handy because we don't have to now. He said Obamacare is un-American. Didn't explain what that means. He also didn't mention that Romney, no thank you, he wrote it as well. What is un-American? Is strapping your dog on top of your car and driving for 12 hours un-American? I don't know. But it's fine, because he then said, Americans don't need healthcare, so it's fine. And then he finished off by saying, Obama is ruled by the poor, and we need to keep the levers of power as far away as possible from them, okay? Next we had Tim. So yeah, he said Obama's human rights record wasn't great, but he said Romney's would be better because he would only abuse human rights in Palestine in line with Israel's policy. He then talked about tax a lot, which was again handy, and then he asked, why is flip-flopping a flaw? Because he'll be flexible, which was poetic, but apparently it was a rhetorical question. So Tom Plank from Republicans Abroad, he said healthcare is a problem, and he said period a lot. John, I was writing my speech during yours, so all I have is John was outraged. And Bush's kill list was better because he put it on a pack of cards, and better to kill Iranians than Pakistanis. So that's what I've got. I'm going to start my speech. And the economy. So why I don't want Romney in the White House is because I believe we're actually electing a third Bush into the White House. His plan for cutting the deficit, I have his plan for a stronger middle class here, fits onto one page. He said, we'll cut wages, we'll cut jobs, we'll cut spending, we'll cut regulation in order to cut the deficit. That's fine, that works. But this is where the ideological incoherency of the Republicans come in. That would work if he didn't also increase the defense budget, because he says, we will immediately reduce the non-secured discretionary spending by 5%, or 22% if you're Paul Ryan. It doesn't really matter, we don't know. And he will also cut all taxes by 20%. What this reminds me of is the early 2000s when George Bush tried this with a massive surplus, and it didn't work. In fact, it got us here, which is great. I've got some little dollar signs on the plan of other things that will also cost more money and maybe not actually cut the deficit that much. He will give every family access to a great school and quality teachers. You don't do that by cutting the education system by 5 or 22%. He said he'll attract and retain the best and brightest from around the world. Same again. He said we'd have some deregulation. that's pretty good. But he said he really only wants, I'll take you in a sec, deregulation to eliminate the regulations destroying the coal industry. Yes, please.
Technically, the best in the prize were attracted by 22 or 5% less taxes. Technically, they have a better standard of living in America.
A lot of technicalities there, Damien, and it really I'm talking about reality, I'm not talking about technicality. I'm going to talk about foreign policy now, Damien. So, foreign policy, I think essentially Romney swings between someone who's dressed up as Obama for Halloween and Dick Cheney's puppy. And so on his plan, he wants to, well, first of all, he wants to label China a currency manipulator on his first day in office. The people who buy a lot of their debt, the people who are the second biggest economy in the world, you don't want to start off your relationship with your neighbours like that because they will bite back. However, to add to this, he also wants to form a Reagan economic zone, and there's actually no explanation of what that is. But it's in East Asia, and essentially it's just to piss off China, so that's fine. Iran, we had a metaphor earlier about Obama being the sleeping driver at the wheel of the bus. I think Romney would actually just hand over the bus to Sheldon Adelson and other billionaires who might just drive the bus for him and drive it straight into Tehran loaded with nuclear bombs. What else? My conclusion is here somewhere. I'll be a sec, Brian. I was going to talk about social policies, but I actually don't think they're at the crux of this. Oh yeah, here we go. We had another thing about his foreign policy. Very few people on Team Romney actually talked about Romney's foreign policy or Mitt Romney at all. But what they did was they made up some conspiracy theories about Obama watching the Libya thing and not watching and whatever. They didn't actually offer us alternatives, which comes to the crux, and I'm concluding now, which is that Romney is essentially an empty shell. This is why I don't like Obama that much, and that is because I would have voted for Mitt Romney if he was 2004 Mitt Romney. However, I wouldn't vote for severely conservative 2008 Mitt Romney or any of the other manifestations that he's created in the last few days. We don't actually know who Mitt Romney is. He's a shell. And essentially, in conclusion, we have a choice between President Average and President Unknown. I think we should stick with the devil that we know. Thank you very much.
The final speaker is the debate from Team Romney, economic senator of Newstalk, and former secretary for the Q&A session of the film, Mr. Marc.
Mr. President, Honorary Secretary, ladies and gentlemen of the University Philosophical Society, ladies and gentlemen, some of us know how to start the speech properly. As your guest, it's my honour that you've invited me here as a former ONSEC. It's good to be home. I'll say a couple of things about standards in the society. We never threw our crap on the floor, Cormac. Dennis, pricks, jerks, and assholes. I think it was Plato who said that when you resort to personal abuse, you've already lost the argument. And I'm going to prove it to you. I had the pleasure of meeting Bill Clinton in June, a great man and a genuine friend of this country. And I don't think he would endorse anything that you have said about your opponents. He has too much class. He has too much style. And unlike Barack Obama, he's a genuine friend of this country. He didn't claim an Irish ancestor from Moneygall one day and then fly over to Westminster and tell the British Parliament that the same person was proof of his British ancestry. When Clinton says he loves this country, he means it. When Obama does it, he's lying through his teeth. But Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan, who are these men anyway? I mean, they look like rejects from the set of Mad Men. Relatives of Don Draper who are not quite as good looking and not half as much fun. In fact, they look like they got fired from Sterling Cooper for not drinking enough martinis at one of Roger Sterling's office parties. Worse still, they remind us of the other character in Mad Men, Pete Campbell. Smarmy, annoying, know-all. Not the kind of people we like to vote for. We're Irish, we like fun. We like Democrats because they do fun things. Like, you know, chatting up interns, driving cars off bridges, appearing drunk and half naked with women who are half their age. Yeah, we like that kind of thing. To be honest, if I had a choice who I wanted to go down the bar and have a drink with, it wouldn't be Romney or Ryan. They're boring. They look like they've had a titanium rod shoved up some part of their anatomy and it needs to be surgically removed. I want to have a drink with Biden and Obama. Greatest respect, but I'm not going to accept any points. Sorry, no disrespect intended, but I'm under time pressure. I want to go for a pint with Obama and Biden. There's just one little problem. In 3 elections in this country in 2002 and 2007, we had a choice between the guy you'd love to go down to Fagan's for a pint with and the geeky, preppy guy. And we chose the guy you'd like to go down to the pub for a pint with. It didn't work out too well. But the choice isn't between personalities. It's between 2 visions of where America should go and the world should go. It's between Democrats and Republicans. But the Republicans are the bad guys, right? Friends of the billionaires. Heartless, extreme, redneck, selfish. Right? I'm afraid it's completely wrong. I work in the media. When I was a kid, there wasn't a kid in Ireland or Britain who didn't want to sit on Jimmy Savile's lap. Last year, the entire country was convinced that a man called Father Kevin Reynolds was guilty of raping a child in Africa. We now know that's not true. And we now know Jimmy Savile was a predator. CNN, MSNBC and CBS. Sure, Fox News is biased towards the Republicans, no doubt about that. But CNN is owned by a Democrat. MSNBC, CBS, they're Democrat stations. Rush Limbaugh got into trouble for using the word, was it bimbo? I can't remember. Slut. Why didn't Keith Olbermann or one of Obama's donors, Bill Maher, get into trouble for applying exactly the same terminology to Sarah Palin? I know she's got a goofy accent and she's annoying. She's like your mother, listening to your mother telling you to clean up your room. She's a very annoying woman. But she is just as much entitled to respect as Sandra Flood. So why wasn't her rights defended by the US media? Because it's grotesquely biased. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. Several myths we have to dismantle. Complete lies, in fact, that the Republicans caused the crisis. It was a subprime mortgage crisis. Subprime mortgages were introduced in 1977 by Jimmy Carter, expanded by Bill Clinton in 1999. Even he admits that was a mistake. George W. Bush, for all his faults, and he had many, tried to reform subprime mortgages and rein in Fannie Mae in 2003. You know who tried to stop him? Barack Obama. You know why? You think Barack Obama's friend of the working man? Rubbish. He's got 10 million, sorry, I'm not accepting any point. He's got 10 million euros in assets in Wall Street, and he is the biggest recipient of campaign donations, 6-figure dollar sums from Fannie Mae, which is one of the institutions behind the subprime crisis that destroyed the world economy. A subprime contamination of the financial markets brought in by 2 Democrat presidents. And Barney Frank, chairman of the House Finance Committee, admitted that the Democrats had been wrong in pushing the subprime agenda. Were the Republicans blameless? Of course they weren't. They made a huge mistake appointing Greenspan. Unlike Dennis Desmond, I don't stand here and say that my side is perfect and the other side are demons. There are great people in the Democrats. Clinton is one of them. And in 2008, for foreign policy reasons, I would have probably voted for Obama. I praised him in my last book, Back from the Brink. But we have to understand that our vision of our understanding of the reality of American politics is completely biased by a media that is almost completely discredited. I am very proud to have worked for the Irish Times. It was a great honour for me. But in my day we had balance. Sure, we had Maureen Dowd and Laura Marlowe on the Democrat side, but we also had Charles Krauthammer and Marc Stein on the Republican side. Now all you have is Laura Marlowe, Paul Krugman, whose litany of incompetence I could spend hours here boring you with, and Maureen Dowd, 3 Democrats, no Republicans. Of course we're all pro-Democrats. RTE, the Irish Times, virtually the entire media is pro-Democrat. So if you're only getting one side of the story, that's why the country is so one-sided. No, sir. I am, proverbially speaking, in the words of Little Britain, that Welsh guy, I am the only gay in the village. I am the only guy willing to stand up and say that I'm broadly Republican. Myth number 2 is that the Republicans are all evil billionaires and the Democrats are the friend of the working man. What a load of crap. John Kerry is a billionaire several times over who availed of tax breaks introduced by George W. Bush. Obama is a millionaire several times over. They're not advocates of the working man, they're advocates of the vested interests, like the unions here who are protecting their end of the thing, the Croke Park deal, and making you forcing you to pay university fees so they can earn 90, 100, 110 grand a year for 16 hours lectures. That's who the Democrats represent now, the vested interest in the public sector. And the working class are suffering from Obama because of a derisory stimulus effort which is doing everything to destroy America's financial stability and is resulting in derisory growth impact. Of course you're going to get some growth bounce back if you put $800 billion into the US economy, but you're stealing from your children. The Democrats have doubled America's debt in the last 5 years. And even when Bush was president, they controlled the Senate. And since then, they've added more to America's debt in 6 years than all the presidents since George Washington. Myth number 3, the Republicans are warmongers. Who started the Vietnam War? The Democrats. Which president has killed 3 times more innocent people in Afghanistan than Bush? Obama. But the media is so biased, they don't tell you about it. So seemingly, if Bush kills children and women in Afghanistan, it's horrific. But if Obama does, it's okay, because he's a nice guy. Myth number 4, the Democrats are nice, moderate people, the Republicans are extremists. You obviously haven't heard of State Bill 1082, put before the Illinois legislature in 2003. On Wednesday, I had a lady called Melissa Oden on my program. She survived a saline abortion in 1977. It killed her twin brother. She was born alive after the abortion at 24 weeks. All she wanted was the right to life. A bill was brought before the Illinois legislature, not to ban abortion, but just to give infants that survived abortion the right to life. That they'd survive the most grotesque and horrendous thing you can do to an unborn child. For God's sake, we're supposed to be concerned about children's rights, aren't we? You know who voted against it? Barack Obama. His alleged reason for doing so was that it might undermine Roe versus Wade. He was lying. There was a clause in the bill that would have prevented Roe versus Wade from being undermined. It was just aimed at giving the right to life of an unborn child who survived an abortion. The weakest, most vulnerable child you can imagine. Barack Obama is a cold-blooded, heartless extremist, cowering behind a mask of media affability, and you buy it hook, line and sinker, just the way you bought Bertie Ahern hook, line and sinker, because you're Irish, and it's what we do. Myth number 5, the 47%, I'm coming to my conclusion. It's a load of nonsense. What Romney